Well, I have kind of a long-winded story about a life-changing moment to get there. About the time I was turning 50, I decided to, let's see if I can renew my Spanish. I took a audited a class at the University of North Alabama, tried to teach myself watercolor, and also renew my knowledge of numerical solution of differential equations for work, but I ended up never using it, although I did work through the problems. Anyway, I started doing watercolors, and I was kind of impressed. I found a really nice book, and then I started buying tutorials and that sort of stuff. And so over time, first couple I did were remarkable. My own personal experience, who knew I could do this? But then as I practiced, they got worse and worse and worse, and I finally gave up. So years later, I gave up on the watercolors. Had kind of a pestiferous friend who said, I've seen one of your watercolors. I want you to do me one. You need to do me a watercolor. Hey, can you do me a watercolor? How about now? Can you do me a watercolor? How about now? I said, I'm getting worse. I'm getting worse. But we'll pause here. So 2017 came along, and my wife was diagnosed with a blood cancer. We were living in Oak Ridge, Tennessee at the time, not too far from Frozen Head State Park, and I decided I needed to get out in the woods and clear my head, just to not think. And of course we were panicked when we got the diagnosis, and she is doing well with treatments. Thank you for your concern. But that first hike in Frozen Head State Park, here comes a woman and a dog going the other direction, and she and her daughter had started a hiking club, and they invited me to participate in the Mountain Laurel Festival hiking marathon, where you have 8 weekends to get your 26 miles in. So I did it. Took me to places I would never have known. And I started hiking in Frozen Head State Park there near Wartburg, Tennessee, at least one weekend a month. And I was all over the park. And there was a certain trail that goes in a cove. You might not notice it or recognize it, but it was terrifying how steep the trail goes across a 45-degree slope. And I was up cautiously up there, and I glanced up to my right, and there was a little ridge top up there with a little grove of trees on it. And I looked up, and it just came to my impression, that's the Holy of Holies. God's right up there. Now, over the years, about that time, I had picked up the practice Lectio Divina, or I call it slow reading, contemplative prayer. And I made a little prayer kit with my daily Bible reading verses, would write them on the little card and then turn it into a prayer. And I would take that with me hiking, pull out my little hiking chair and sit down and pray through a couple of those cards just to try to find God out in the woods. But that day, I looked up, and there, wow, there's something going on up there. So my friend was pestering me to do her a watercolor. So since I'd gotten out of practice and had gotten worse, I had an idea. I will take a piece of watercolor paper and run it through a printer with just the faintest outline of something I was interested in doing, kind of like a pre-drawn sketch. Well, you can't run watercolor paper through a printer, not on the average. So it smeared. And so I turned it into a landscape I had seen in Utah, where they have in the fall patches of some species of oak, that this patch will be yellow, the next patch will be orange, red, so it looks like a patchwork quilt. Marvelous thing. And for some reason, I felt compelled to write my scriptures from my daily email on the edges and interstices between the puddles of color on that, and I gave it to her. And I could not tell you why I felt compelled to write scripture on my watercolors. But I picked it up again, and I started doing one there and again, and every time I would write on the edges like that. And I did a couple of the R.M. Brooks store there in Wartburg, Tennessee. And so I was puzzled by this. I was just absolutely puzzled by this. I think that was 2017 maybe. Anyway. So 2019 comes along, December. I was chairman of deacons at a church, and they had a policy where deacons had to re-up every year. And that did two things. One, if you were having family issues like we were with my wife's health, You could take a year off and then come back again and serve. But it also gave the church an opportunity to give a little feedback on your performance. If you were particularly boneheaded or something like that, they could have a say in your eligibility to serve. So you got like 25% no votes. That was a thing. Anyway, I decided, well, shucks, I'll just re-up. So we come to the January deacons meeting, and I'm still chair, left over. We're going to elect the new chairman. The pastor shows up, though, and the man was yellow as a canary. Jaundice. I've never seen a human being that color. And turns out he was diagnosed just a few days after that with pancreatic cancer. And he went from diagnosis to dead in 9 weeks. So that's where these storylines converge. So in March, as he lay dying, he was over in a hospital in Knoxville, and they asked me to come over and see him. He wanted to kind of pass the torch, I suppose. Just had a few words with me. The man was in terrible pain. It was awful. And it was awful. They had brought the family in, and they were going to turn on the morphine, and they didn't expect him to last 24 hours. So had a brief conversation with him, a word of prayer, and then went back home. The next day, I said, I've got to get back to my place on the side of the mountain. I've got to get back where I felt closer to the presence of God. And so it was early March. There were icicles on the ground, icicles on the little streams, and it was pretty cold. I went up there, and as I got there, to my place there on the side of the mountain, I kicked a rock in the trail, and a line from a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins came to me, and it was from God's Grandeur, and the line was, "Turn a stone and start a wing," which meant angelic presence, the presence of God all around. And then momentarily, as I was thinking of my friend at the point of death there 30, 40 miles away in Knoxville, me up on the side of that quiet mountain, another poem came to mind. And I forget the author, but it has a line in it that goes, "Cry, and when thou canst not sadder, cry. There upon your so sore loss, you'll see the traffic of Jacob's ladder, pitched between heaven and Charing Cross." But there on the hillside, kind of above Wartburg, if you will, more to the interior of the park, still hear some traffic noise over there a little bit. In that moment, I had Jacob's ladder pitched between heaven and Wartburg, and the missed rhyme somehow was jarring, and at that point the tears came, and it wasn't a polite little, it wasn't a polite little cry. It was one of those snot dripping tears and slobber coming out of your face, so you got to bend over to keep from getting it on your shirt. I cried for my friend who was dying there. And in that moment, I received a flash of understanding about why I was compelled to write scripture on the edges and interstices of the color blotches on my paintings. Now, growing up in West Texas, my daddy was city park superintendent, but he was also a bivocational pastor of a little church in ranching country. And my daddy was a great man, one of the greatest men I've ever met. And he used to quote what he called the old-time preachers from time to time. He said the old-time preachers used to say, "There's a broken heart in every pew." So if you look around, the next 25 people you meet, more or less, one of those is going through the very worst thing they've ever faced in their life. So I thought about the family there at the bedside of my friend. And so moral is be kind. Go out of your way to be kind to people, because sometimes they just need just a little encouraging word can make a life-changing difference for folks all around you. Now, I said I understood why I had been writing on the edges of the color patches on my watercolors with scripture. And when I was in college, I had an English professor that said, the artist is just another critic. So I'm not much of an artist, so I'll let you be a critic and you tell me, why am I? Well, with a wink and a nod, just leave it right there.